All right, so UFC 209, Woodley versus Thompson 2. You know how much respect I have for Tyron Woodley and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and how much respect I have for the way their first fight played out. They've both been on this podcast, I think, 3 times. But, Kenny, I have to start with Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson. I just don't know how you start anywhere else. This is a fight that really has been in the makings for over a year. I was in a van with Joe Silva December of 2015 after Tony Ferguson submitted Edson Barboza, won $100,000 in bonus money that night. And I said to Joe at the time, I said, dude, Ferguson 7 or 8 in a row. I mean, got to be title fight next, right? And he said, I think I'm going to do the Khabib fight. And of course, Ferguson went on to fight Rafael dos Anjos, and now the winning streak is at 9. And now this fight, Kenny, that really, at least in terms of the discourse with the matchmakers, dates to 2015, is finally going down this Saturday night.
I mean, Tony Ferguson said it best, I think. He's like, this is the main event. This is the real main event. I don't know if it's the real main event, but it is a damn good fight. Now, I don't know if people realize how rare this is, that, back in the day we used to see this, but when we see 2 of the best 155-pounders, I mean, without a doubt, both have faced insane competition. Both have been nothing but perfect at 155 pounds. And finally, we're gonna get our answer. These guys do not like each other. These guys are red hot, and I'm just fascinated by this fight. Can Ferguson find a solution to the wrestling game of Khabib Nurmagomedov? This is a guy who all he does is take you down, control you, submit you, beat you up, whatever it takes. This guy is an absolute monster, and Ferguson is good everywhere. Extremely dangerous, a true finisher through and through, on the feet and on the ground. He's absolutely fearless. He has cardio for days, as does Khabib Nurmagomedov. I don't know which way I'm going to go on this one, man. This is one of the most confusing fights to pick in a very long time.
Well, and I think it might be one fight that you make a prediction on today here on Monday, and then when you're forced to make a pick on Saturday night, you might go the opposite way, given everything that you'll ingest between now and then, and given the fact that I think on paper it is a very close fight. And I think you can really only have championship stakes for a fight of this magnitude. I understand a lot of fans and media members take issue with these interim titles and the frequency of them, and certainly Conor McGregor only won the belt in November, and here you are having an interim title a few months later. But given what these two gentlemen have done, especially at 155 pounds, I don't know that the fight makes sense unless you put some sort of belt on the line and just, if for nothing else, confirming that the winner, without a shadow of a doubt, is going to face Conor McGregor for the undisputed championship. I just can't wait to see it play out. I'm glad it's 5 rounds, which I think is a must. And for Tony Ferguson, it's just crazy to think that this would be 10 consecutive fights, 10 UFC wins. And for Khabib, it would be 25-0, and yet neither man would be an undisputed UFC champion. These are 2 of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. I mean, I was surprised to look at the pound-for-pound rankings at UFC.com this morning and not see Ferguson in that top 15. I think Khabib is maybe at number 8, or maybe he was 13. I think Khabib was 13, but just crazy how talented these 2 guys are. And at least for me, Kenny, Tony Ferguson, as watchable a fighter as there is in the sport, and I think maybe for me the best example of the modern day mixed martial artist that transitions from one skill to the next so fluidly and so seamlessly. It's just hard to find any gaps in anything that Ferguson has done. I know he doesn't have the undefeated record like Khabib, but I think if Nurmagomedov is to expose some weaknesses from Tony Ferguson, largely he'll be the first in the UFC, at least over the last 3 or 4 years, to do so.
I think that's very true. And it's interesting because both these guys, sometimes it can take them a little bit to get going. And once they get their momentum, man, they're just pretty much unstoppable. So I'm very curious to see if both these guys start to feel themselves during the fight. I think it's going to be an absolute classic. I'm fascinated by this fight. Both these guys, are just killers. Again, I don't know which way I'm going to go.
And the way Khabib uses his body on the ground is just so special, and at times it really looks effortless. So I'm really curious to see Ferguson off of his back. You know how good a guard he has. It's just a fascinating matchup. I think Joe Rogan said on our 208 pay-per-view broadcast that it was the fight he was looking forward to most that's on the slate right now for 2017, and it's hard to argue otherwise. And we're certainly going to get to Woodley and Thompson and everything else that makes UFC 209, even for casual fans, I think a must-buy pay-per-view. But Nurmagomedov Ferguson, is absolute fire. And as far as the betting line is concerned, we'll get to it later, but Nurmagomedov is a 2-1 favorite right now. I see the fight as being a little bit closer than that. But, man, two of the hardest workers in the sport. Thankfully, both of them have stayed relatively healthy of late to preserve this matchup. I know Khabib at times has dealt with injuries, and then Ferguson had to pull out when this fight was initially slated to go down, but just a massive, massive fight, and I think rightfully so. The winner is going to get belted by Dana White on Saturday night. All right, so Nurmagomedov-Ferguson leads the show today, but a close second, Tyron Woodley and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson can flow. Before we get to Rashad Evans, I just want to get your thoughts on this fight without a prediction. So they fought at UFC 205. I thought Woodley won the fight. I know that was probably the minority opinion. Majority draw, no problem there. They run it back here this weekend. A lot of people talk about the adjustments and which fighter will make the requisite adjustments to make this an easier night at the office, because candidly, it wasn't an easy fight for either guy. How do you see the rematch playing out relative to the way the first 25 minutes unfold?
Well, I did have it a draw. I thought it was a fantastic fight, obviously. I think that Tyron Woodley really threw off Wonderboy by just waiting for him, by being extremely patient and waiting for Wonderboy to come to him. I think Wonderboy's offense is created by the forward pressure of his opponents, and he finds angles off of their forward movement in order to counter them repeatedly with whether it's blitz attacks, hook kicks, side kicks to the body. And Wonderboy, or I should say Woodley, was never giving any of those things to Wonderboy. So Wonderboy was a little bit uncomfortable moving forward, especially with the threat of the takedown that Woodley possesses. And I think that Woodley needs to do that exact same thing. Now, I say this all the time, but when you're facing a guy like Wonderboy, you just don't see that style very often. And I think Woodley did a tremendous job in preparation for that fight, getting the right sparring partners, seeing that kind of karate style, that in and out movement, I think helped him a lot. And now as we go into this 6th round here for UFC 209, I do feel that Woodley's going to be that much more comfortable moving forward and understanding that when he is patient against Wonderboy, it suits him much better than just kind of aggressively pressing forward against someone with the kind of offense and counter offense that Wonderboy possesses.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, would you think it's fair to say that if Tyron Woodley can go in there and finish Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, that he'll never be underappreciated again? I mean, it does seem to me like Wonderboy is far more appreciated by the general public, the masses, the fans out there than Woodley is. And again, every time I break down Tyron Woodley's resume, I forget just how good it is, and the Condit win, people put an asterisk next to that because Condit was injured, on the Gastelum win, obviously KG missed weight and Woodley ended up sort of being the bad guy in that equation. In a lot of respects, he hasn't been able to catch a break. Then when he waited to fight Robbie Lawler, more critics jumped on board there, but of course he took care of business that night, and I thought he did again against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. So I think this is the opportunity for Tyron Woodley to really stamp his legacy, and I think, you go out and finish a guy like Wonderboy Thompson who's never been finished before. I think you get everything and then some in terms of that appreciation you're looking for.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that if someone's going to get it done against Wonderboy, it's going to be a guy who at least has the threat of the takedown, because those are the kind of things that can kind of get a guy to kind of not let his hands go. And I think Wonderboy feels like he didn't let his hands go as much, or didn't let his strikes fly as much because of that threat of the takedown. And Woodley did a very nice job of feinting his way in, keeping Wonderboy guessing. He landed some very big shots, and that's another thing that we've seen Woodley do, is he paces himself so much better now. And I'm sure he wishes he could take back that guillotine choke, which was so close. Instead of going flat to his back, if he went to his side, it would have been game over. He really beat up Wonderboy hardcore in that fight. But another thing that we found out about Wonderboy, he's not going to go away easy, man.
Right.
This guy has so much heart, and that was something we never really saw Wonderboy in trouble before. Maybe in the Matt Brown fight, he had his opportunities to maybe tap out due to some heavy strikes, but I mean, not a lot of welterweights in the world could take that punishment and that choke from Tyron Woodley and survive. That was just amazing.
Yeah, no doubt. A lot of fighters get confidence from the fact that they can take a beating like that. And a lot of fighters, Kenny, have said to me, not a lot of people realize that I can take a real beating. Just because I haven't absorbed a lot of concussive damage in the UFC doesn't mean that if I get in a firefight and I have to change my strategy based upon a cut or a knockdown early in the fight, I can do it, and I think you're right. We learned a lot about Wonderboy Thompson, and I think we'll learn a lot about both of these guys on Saturday night. Can't wait to see it all play out. We'll get a prediction from Ken Flo coming up later in the program. And now joining us on the guest line, good friend of the show, the former UFC light heavyweight champion who Saturday night makes his UFC middleweight debut against Daniel Kelly. Sugar Rashad Evans is with us.